Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue improving their positions, and according to information we have, the Russians began full-scale offensive operations towards the city of Vuhledar. The Russians are advancing to the west of the city of Pavlovka and in the vicinity of the coal mine South Donbass. And according to different mappers, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and some sources are saying that the Russians have already crossed the river of Kashlagach and begun spreading their offensive to the west of the city of Vuhledar. On the other side, on the other hand, most likely the Russians are going to attack in direction of Prechistovka as well. Since the beginning of June, we've been talking a lot about the city, about the village of Prechistovka, trying to compare and summarize the numbers, to count the numbers of events that have been taking place in this area since the beginning of the summer. And if we increase the numbers of days once again since the July of 2024, we're gonna say that almost every single square kilometer, even square centimeter of this territory was under very heavy fire from the Russian side. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions with FPV drones, with artillery, with stealth flamethrower systems, with FAPs, with Lemur missiles, so everything, all types of weapons the Russians have been using for the previous 3 months. And most likely we can make a conclusion that most likely everything is ready for Russian offensive operation in this direction as well. So once again, most likely the Russians are planning to attack the village of Prechistovka, and most likely the Russians are planning to attack in the western part of the Vuhledar. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians improved their positions right in front of the coal mine. The Russians got as close as possible, and maybe this upcoming night the Russians are going to make first attempts to enter the coal mine itself. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians have improved their positions along the entirety of 424 road from Konstantinovka towards the coal mine. There are just few places, few sectors of the road that are still in Ukrainian control. We're talking about the part of the road in the vicinity of Vuhledar, of the coal mine, in the part of the road between the city of Konstantinovka and Pobeda. So, but as for this part of TO524 road, the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces who were moving along the three lines. So we can make a conclusion that the Russians are trying to maintain the line of combat contact, to shorten the gray zone, and to get as close as possible to this TO524 road. So once again, according to information we have, most likely during the next few days, the Russians will try to take under control the Gardens Association Shakhtar and to take the fields in this area. And after that, the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the road from Pobeda to Vuhledar, and then the full-scale offensive operation towards the villages of Bogayavlenka and Yelizavetovka and Katerinovka will start. Now let's move further and let's talk about the most important, the most interesting, and the most shock direction. We are talking about the Pokrovsk direction. Currently the main clashes and the heaviest clashes are taking place for the city of Selydove. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have a lot of icons, as you can see, and most of them are the icons with the Russian flag, with the flag which confirms additional progress of the Russians. We have confirmed updates, unconfirmed updates, we have geolocations, we have some reports from reliable sources, we have a lot, and mainly most of them, all of them are just about one thing. The Ukrainians are losing this battle, the Ukrainians are retreating, and the Russians are about to break through this defense belt completely and to enter the operational space. And the problem is about the Ukrainians. We will just few words about the Pokrovsk direction. The main problem of the Ukrainians in this area, according to Deep State map, they have their own service. They stated, the Deep State, that the Ukrainians, that the officers and commanders on the Pokrovsk direction, they doesn't know the real picture on the line of combat contact. The Ukrainian officers, Ukrainian generals, Ukrainian let's say lieutenants, and many other different ranks don't know for sure where exactly are the Russian positions and where exactly are the Ukrainian positions, and they can't control the situation. And this situation doesn't allow the Ukrainians to understand where exactly they can slow down the Russians and to stabilize the line of combat contact. if we compare the Pokrovsk direction with, let's say, the Kursk direction where the Ukrainians are in offensive state, we can see and we can find one important difference, and the difference is about the knowing and the understanding of the stabilization line. For example, when the Ukrainians just began their full-scale offensive operation in the Kursk area, probably there was a meeting of Russian generals, of Russian officers, maybe with Putin, where they gave Putin the real and correct information that yes, everything is so bad, that the Ukrainians are advancing, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over significant territories, and most likely later during this meeting, Putin asked his general where exactly do they think the Russians are able to slow down and to stop the Ukrainians. And most likely the Russian generals told him that most likely the Russians would be able to slow down the Ukrainians completely along the Rhine line, Rylsk, Stepanovka, Lvov, and Kursk. So this is the area where the Russians would be able 100% to slow down and to stop the Ukrainians. And right after that meeting, the Russians began creation of defense belt, a real defense belt, significant defense belt, as we can see right now in the area of Zaporozhye, in the area of maybe Donetsk and something like this. Significant number of fortifications, significant number of trenches, and the most important, first the Russians built the trenches and the fortifications along the main road, and by the time the Russians finished this fortification line, they realized and they saw that Ukrainians still hadn't reached this territory. After that, the Russians began improving their defense belt further in the southern direction. So while the main Russian forces were trying to slow down the Ukrainians along the line of combat contact in Korenevo, in Sudzha, in Kromskie Byki, in Glushkovo region, the Russians began building the layered defense belt. They finished with one layer. Now they're finished. They have just finished with the second layer, and maybe tomorrow the Russians will begin building the third layer, and so on. And in months or in 2 weeks, the Russians' defense layer will reach the line of combat contact, and then the Russians will be able to begin a full-scale counter-offensive operation with the purpose to restore complete over the territories they lost during the Ukrainian Kursk offensive. And when talking about the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians have already broken through the Ukrainian defense belt. The Russians captured significant number of towns, villages, and cities, and most likely the Russians will capture additional significant number. The Russians will capture Selydove, most likely Pokrovsk. The Russians would capture Girny, Kurachovo itself, Vuhledar, many other different towns and cities in this direction, and the Ukrainians currently don't know for sure where exactly they can stop, because if the Ukrainians knew the answer to this question, they most likely would begin building this such a defense belt as well. But there is one important thing. Who knows, maybe the Ukrainians have already realized that the area and the only line where they are able to stop the Russians is already Dnipro River. Maybe this is the reality. Maybe this is the truth. Maybe this is the truth that Ukrainians are trying to hide from everybody. They understand that they lost the battle for Pokrovsk. They lost this adventure, this, I don't know how to say, this crazy thing with the Kursk area. They failed completely according to Syrsk, and now they understand that there is no need to build defense belt behind the city of Pokrovsk, because the Russians would be able to bypass this as so easy as never. So that's why they understand that the next defense belt is Dnipro. This is the most important thing I would like to point your attention. Not the clashes right now over the cities is important. It's very important, of course, but it's like the now. It's like here and now, where the clashes are and what kind of progress the Russians managed to achieve during the previous 24 hours, or what kind of progress the Russians are going to achieve during the next day. The most important is the question where exactly the Ukrainians are building the next defense belt. And the question is nowhere. The Ukrainians are building the next defense belt nowhere. Not in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, not to the west of Pokrovsk, not even along Dnipro River. They built some defense belt a few months ago and they stopped. So this is the main issue and the main problem. Now let's talk about the details about the situation on the ground. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the Pokrovsk direction. There are very heavy clashes right now, and the Russians are improving positions. According to different mappers, according to pro-Russian sources, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter from the village of Mimrik the village of Lisivka. So they answered basically the city of Kupiansk, and the Russians answered the village of Galicinovka. So as you can see, the Russians continue the formation and the creation of the Nivolskaya, Zaryana, Kurachovka, Galicinovka cauldron. But today we got report from pro-Ukraine sources, and there was a video published by the Ukrainians that they began withdrawing their positions, and the Ukrainians began removing their forces from these fields and from this very dangerous zone, because probably in 2-3 days there will be no more chances for the Ukrainians to evacuate their soldiers exactly from this cauldron. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians moved their FPV drone focus further in the southwestern direction, and today we got additional batch of videos from the city and from the vicinity of the city by the name of Girnik. In this video we can see a number of Russian FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian vehicles that were moving from one point to another, and as a result of those attacks the Russians destroyed another significant number of vehicles, personal carriers, supply and support trucks of armored forces of Ukraine. And currently this is the biggest problem for the Ukrainians, and this is exactly the tactics that the Russians are using. First they're moving their FPV drones, and then they're moving their regular forces. For example, if we compare the numbers of updates since the beginning of August, not like the number of updates but the line of FPV drone control, just a few days ago the line of FPV drone control was a line of armored forces of Russian Federation from the city of Pokrovsk to the city of Kupiansk, and as you can see, significant number of FPV drone attacks were located exactly along this line. But now today on the 29th of August we see that the Russians managed to move their FPV drone control line even further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, and now the line of FPV drone control goes from Pokrovsk down to Tsukurne and then to Hirnik, which confirms that the Russians are able to move for the same distance, for the same square kilometers deep inside the territory of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to bring additional forces because everything is under complete control. So this is a very interesting tactics, and the Russians are using these tactics very professionally. Now let's talk about the city of Selydove, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have a lots of icons, most of them is icon with the flag, but we have some geolocations as well. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were raising their flag in the industrial zone of the coal mine by the name of Russia. This is Russian flag, and this video confirms complete control over this territory. Furthermore, the author of this video zoomed out, and we see that the very heavy clashes were already taking place in the city of Selydove and the village of Mikhailovka itself. We see the consequences of fire, which confirms that the clashes were taking place exactly in these 2 points. Later we got additional update from the coal mine, from the Toretsk itself, from the landfill itself. In this video we can see how the Ukrainian FPV drone was attacking the place with the Russian flag, trying to destroy it. So this video confirms complete control over the landfill. Later we got additional update from pro-Ukrainian sources from the 15th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. In this video we can see a number of Ukrainian FPV drone attacks, and the most important video is this one. In this video we can see a group of Russian soldiers who were storming Ukrainian buildings, and this video was geolocated, and this video took place exactly, the episode from this video took place exactly in this area, which confirms additional Russian control. And based on these 3 videos we have adjusted the map over the industrial zone of the coal mine, over the landfill, and over the northeastern part of the village of Mikhailovka. Furthermore, we have additional progress on the ground according to different sources and different mappers. The pro-Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russians have strong and have just secured the eastern part of Mikhailovka, but the central part, the western part, and the eastern part of Selydove are in the gray zones. As for different mappers, for example, pro-Russian sources are saying that the Russians captured completely the village of Mikhailovka, and the Russians managed to cut the main supply road along the streets, Kazatskaya streets, between Pokrovsk and further in direction of Kupiansk. So this is the edge Russian positions according to different mappers. Furthermore, this information was confirmed by pro-neutral mappers that the Russians managed to capture significant territories inside of Selydove. Summarizing everything, we see that the Russians captured 2 important strategical points. The Russians captured the landfills, the Toretsk of Karachenka and the Toretsk of Russia. But the Ukrainians, according to information we have, according to these geolocations, control this high-rise building area in the central part of the city. Anyway, despite the fact that Ukrainians control the main stronghold, the high-rise building area, it doesn't mean that Ukrainians are able to hold these territories for a very long time, because the Russians control the strategical heights, and most likely the Russians can see everything, and furthermore, most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from Selydove very, very soon. And now the most important thing, as we discussed in the 5 minutes ago, nobody knows for sure, nobody knows exactly where exactly the Ukrainians are planning to fall back, because there are no more strong, let's say, defense belts to the west of Selydove and to the west of Pokrovsk. The next defense belt is the Dnipro River. So the situation is very difficult for the Ukrainians, as you can see. Now let's talk about the northern part. We have a lot of very interesting updates. According to different mappers, pro-Russian, neutral, and pro-Ukraine mappers, the Russians established complete control over the landfills in the northwestern part of the Novogrodovka. And this landfill was captured. Furthermore, the Russians captured this Terikon, and the Russians are moving further. According to different sources, the Russians secured the city of Nikolaevka. Furthermore, some Russian sources reported that as a result of sabotage and reconnaissance group offensive operation, the Russians managed to answer this block of Mirnograd and secure and completely secured this territory. And this is very important because, as you can see, according to roads, according to supply and support roads, almost everything goes exactly through this block. And according to information, the Russians entered this territory with the purpose to cut the last supply line and not to allow the Ukrainians to reinforce their forces in the southern part of Mirnograd and in this defense belt that has a very rich network of the fortifications. So if this information is correct, if this information will be confirmed by geolocations or by different mappers, of course, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense belt in this direction, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the city of Mikhailovka, Miralyubovka, and then further Mykolaiv, and only then to Mirnograd. So very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. Furthermore, we have additional updates from the city of Novotoretsk. According to information we have, the Russians crossed the river of Казённый Торец and moved in the northern direction and cut the only supply road that was going from the city of Miralyubivka, from the village of Miralyubivka towards the village of Yelizavetovka. So the Russians captured the road and established complete physical control. And as you can see, according to the map, Yelizavetovka is no longer have more or less reliable supply roads, and most likely during the next few days, the Russians will try to take under control this territory, and this will allow the Russians to start offensive towards the city, towards the village of Vozdvizhenka, that located to the southeast from this village of Yelizavetovka. So a very interesting situation, because if the Russians are able to do this, they will be able to establish complete and physical and fire control over the road N32 that goes from Mirnograd to the city of Konstantinivka. So we see that the Pokrovsk lines are crumbling. The Ukrainians are no longer able to stop this process. They're losing everything. They're losing territories, forces, manpower, and we see that they're not planning and they're not redeploying their forces back from the Kursk direction to the Pokrovsk area, which will lead to complete defeat of the Ukrainians in this area, obviously. Now let's move further and let's talk about Toretsk, New York agglomerations. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions further in the western direction from Yurievka and Novgorodska, and as a result of clashes, they captured additional 3 lines right in front of the village of Pantelimonovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians are moving further deep inside of the territory of the city of Toretsk, and they captured additional buildings. And as you can see, the Russians decided not to attack the prison right in front. They decided to encircle this territory from the north and the northwest. If the Russians are able to reach this point, they will be able to cut the prison and the landfill from supply and support, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the block of Zabalka. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians have almost established complete control over the city of Druzhba. We got the video from the 32nd Mechanized Brigade. In this video we can see the edge Russian positions that were FPV droned by the Ukrainians. This video confirms and show us the edge Russian positions, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. So summarizing everything, the Russians control around 80% of Druzhba, and probably during the next few days the village of Druzhba would be captured completely. Now let's move further. We continue receiving additional updates from Siversk direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the village of Verkhnikayanska, trying to reduce the Ukrainian defense belt, the Ukrainian positions. Yet the Russians haven't started any offensive or operation on the ground. Maybe they don't have enough of forces for this offensive, because now they are trying to push in the Toretsk and in the Pokrovsk directions. But who knows? Maybe if Ukrainians redeploy some forces from this area, the Russians will begin offensive with the purpose to go through the Verkhnikayanska and to reach the eastern outskirts of Siversk. I'll remind you that just yesterday we got report that the Russians captured or established some partial control over this stronghold. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. We have additional updates. Today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to secure the territory of the village of Stelmakhovka. The territory was captured completely, and we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Currently the Russians reached the operational space. The next target for the Russians is the village of Lazova, and if the Russians are able to take under control the village, then there's going to be a complete disaster for the Ukrainians, because the Russians will be able to begin bombing and attacking the Ukrainians along the Oskol River, starting from Novoplatonovka to the city of Kurilovka, which is not very good for the Ukrainians. Their supply and their logistic will be ruined, obviously. We got some geolocations that confirms Russian progress in contested area. This territory used to be in contested zone, but today the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces in this side of Pishane, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Now let's move further. We have additional updates from the village of Sinkovka. The Russian sources published the video how they managed to establish and secure completely the northern part of the village and to raise the Russian flag. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. And this video doesn't confirm that the Russians secured the entire Sinkovka, but at least they managed to secure the central and the northern part. I'll remind you that during the previous attempts to attack the village, the Russians suffered significant losses. It took place in December of 2023, in January 2024. There were very heavy clashes exactly for this point, but now the Russians, as we can see, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to improve their position significantly. Now the Russians are moving further. Most likely the edge Russian positions go somewhere here, and if this information is correct, then the battle for Kupiansk itself is about to begin. And now let's move further. As for Kharkiv direction, we haven't received almost anything, just a regular artillery activity. And as for the Kursk direction, during the previous 24 hours the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces. In this video we can see the work of Russian reconnaissance drone, and as a result of this work they managed to discover the warehouse of Ukraine and multiple launch rocket systems, and as a result of Iskander strike, that ammo depot and warehouse was destroyed. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses, as you can see. Furthermore, we have additional updates from the Ukrainian flower, from Suja flower. The Suja flower stopped blooming, as you can see. During the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians haven't managed to improve their positions even for a single square kilometer, but during the previous 24 hours we got additional videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the concentration of Ukrainian forces. As I understand, the Ukrainians are waiting the approval, they are waiting for authorization from the Western countries, from England, from London, from Paris, from Washington, to authorize Ukrainians to use their weapon to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. Without this authorization, the Ukrainians can't move further. And of course, in this case, time works in Russian favor. The Ukrainians are not receiving this authorization, which gives the Russian additional time, additional days to bomb and attack the concentration of Ukrainian forces. Most likely, the Western countries will authorize Ukraine, but this might be too late. According to information we have, London and Paris have already authorized Ukraine to use this weapon, but unofficially, because they understand that if they authorize this official, this can lead to additional escalation with the United States of America. So that's why they try to do everything silently. Anyway, we still haven't received any updates about these attacks on the deep inside of the territory of Russia. Maybe this is going to happen very soon, but once again, something tells me that Ukrainians are not going to attack further deep inside of the territory of Russia due to significant number of layers of defense that the Russian engineers have already created. Once again, while the Ukrainians don't understand where exactly they can slow down the Russians have created another layered defense belt, and the Ukrainians currently have already have no chances to go through this area. So this is the situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.